anything with it. What you got? I suppose.
So I realized that triathlon's a sport that 1 week you can be racing really, really well, and 1 week you can have a bad week.
Simon Lessing, a man who began his triathlon career in Durban, South Africa in 1986, recognized his own talent. He was a national class swimmer and also cross-country runner.
Lessing competing for Great Britain in the World Championships, races professionally for a French team, but lives in Germany.
Lessing is also a world long-distance champion as well, so 10 or 20 kilometers, it's no worry for the British #1.
My race tactics are to come out with the lead bunch in the swim and try and stay in touch with the lead riders, and hopefully I can do what I have to do on the run. I am a runner initially, and we'll see how it goes.
Well, welcome to another edition of Rezileance.com, and today I'm delighted to welcome in the studio Simon Lessing. Simon, who is a legend of triathlon. I know he probably doesn't consider himself that, but we certainly do. For those of us that were racing back in the day, or anybody that was involved in the International Triathlon Union series, Simon was like a racing god for a lot of us. And the cool thing for me was that he was actually originally, like me, from South Africa. So there was always an interest in Simon and what he was doing, and this is a man that knows about resilience. So welcome, Simon. Great to have you with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great. And Simon nowadays is based in Boulder, Colorado, which has been one of my home bases. So I bump into him here or there at the gym or at the pool, and he's very active with Boulder Coaching, which is his business, with Darren Derrick, and the two of them out coaching people all around the town, and I've seen out there doing it. So what brings Simon in today is we just wanted to chat and revisit some of the amazing things this guy's done in his career. Wow, it's a long list of stuff. I mean, in terms of triathlon, 5-time world champion, I think 4 times in Olympic distance, once in long distance, and then an Ironman champion. He set a world record of, I believe, in the Olympic distance, I think it was 1 hour and 39 minutes, Simon, something like that?
Before GPS. So
before GPS.
Worked in my favor.
Which, for any of us, or those of us that raced Olympic distance, that kind of time was something off the charts special. So this is a man who had a lot of speed. He's raced in the Olympic Games, the 2000 Games, placed 9th, I believe, in that race. I think I remember watching that, actually, for Great Britain. So Simon has had an interesting and storied career in the world of triathlon, and then also has this title to his name, MBE, which is kind of like, wow, this guy has an MBE from the Queen. And what is that like, getting an MBE? How does that feel, being MBE?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was a surprise, quite honestly, because I think the only other triathlete that had received an MBE at the time was Aaron Baker. So I think I was the first in Great Britain, first triathlete that is. So, obviously it's nice to be recognized for the effort that you've put into your passion. And, obviously here in the United States, people question what that is. They think it's a degree of some sort. And sometimes I don't correct people on that. So, yeah. So, I have a MBE.
So what was the purpose of them bestowing the MBE on you? Was it sports achievement? Or?
Yeah, so obviously I think it was just services in sport, and obviously I had represented Great Britain at that point for about a decade, so had accumulated some pretty consistent results. So I think it was just an acknowledgement, totally unexpected. So yeah, sure, it was nice to visit Buckingham Palace. I went into areas of Buckingham Palace I typically would never have had the opportunity. So yeah.
So you met the Queen?
Actually, Prince Charles.
Prince Charles.
Yeah,
oh my
Prince
goodness.
Charles, yeah.
Wow.
So very briefly.
But that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
something different.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you ended up racing a lot for Great Britain, but let's talk a little bit about your early days growing up in South Africa. Anybody who looks at the Boulder Coaching website will see a little bit of your history. Actually, pretty interesting story about you and why you decided to leave, and the challenges of living under apartheid and some of your philosophies. And I mean, it sounds like you were doing pretty well in South Africa, but then you decided one day you'd had enough. Tell us more about why and what happened.
Well, I just graduated from high school, so at that time we still had conscription, so military service. Obviously, it was a very politically turbulent time. We're talking around 1988, and so it was towards the end of apartheid, but certainly there was unrest. There were a lot of issues politically going on. And I had also, you know, fortunately, actually, through growing up in a running environment, which actually was one of the most probably only multiracial things or competitions that you could compete in for the most part. Swimming certainly wasn't multiracial.
Right.
So I always had an awareness that there were those that and those that had nothing, essentially, on a racial spectrum. Right. So I grew up in a pretty environmentally, politically conscious environment, and realized that, you know, this whole apartheid thing was not really the way this country was going. Did not support it. Certainly didn't want to go and, you know, represent or partake in my defense force obligations. So alongside with triathlon, I had the opportunity to sort of up and leave. My mother was born in the UK, so I'd always had a British passport growing up. So that was kind of always on the sideline as an opportunity. Right. Likewise, there were a couple of other athletes at the time. Mandy Dean, Andreas Lombardozzi. Mandy Dean raced for Germany. Andreas Lombardozzi raced for Italy. Yeah. And we all kind of wingled our way out one way or another. So for me, the driving factor was I had just won the South African Championships at 18. Obviously, I was a dreamer, thinking I could do way better, potentially maybe, you know, try and become one of the best triathletes in the world. So that, you know, was really getting down to pursuing a dream. So having a dream, trying to focus on that dream and trying to figure out what the best way to do that was. And then pushing me was the fact that I had military service that I didn't particularly want to do either. So I left shortly after high school, shortly after I completed high school, and went over to the UK primarily.
Wow, yeah. So you ended up there, and your family was still back in South Africa? Or did
my family was still based in Durban, South Africa, and my dad had a company there, so he was still, you know, obviously actively working. So it was kind of an opportunity to get out, an opportunity to pursue, as I said, a passion and a dream, realizing that I'd most probably at that point reached the pinnacle in terms of competition and in terms of where I could take my ability at that point. So, you know, I met a few people along the way who encouraged me, and kind of never looked back, really. So
that's cool. But you were a sailor, right? So when you were growing up, you were doing a lot of sailing. Why did you pick triathlon versus sailing?
Yeah, so I mean, our whole family sailed. So we pretty much, really, the entire family sailed multiple different boats. We obviously raced down at Point Yacht Club, and then so there will always be Point Yacht Club on a Saturday, Saturday afternoon racing, and then Midmar Lake racing during on a Sunday. So weekends were pretty busy, and then you know, I grew up as a swimmer, and I ran competitively from a young age as well. And you know, people say, well, how did you find triathlon? And I would say that triathlon pretty much found me. Okay. At the time, my swim coach, one of my swim coaches was David McCarney. And David McCarney was obviously a very good swimmer in his own right. I think he was a Springbok swimmer at the time, and then transitioned into coaching. And he had also started doing triathlon. And the very first sort of idea or recollection of triathlon that I had was the London to Paris triathlon, where South Africa entered a team, but it wasn't called the South African team, it was called the Leppen Sport Team. Oh, yeah. So sponsored by Leppen Products in South Africa, and it was a race that was televised in South Africa, and I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. Not only that, one of the participants was on the South African team was my swim coach. So that was kind of a motivating factor to get me involved right from the beginning, and he kind of suggested, you know, you're already swimming, you're running, why don't you give a few triathlons a go? And I'm like, oh, this can't be so hard. And I entered a few of the local competitions on the Durban beachfront, and at that time they were still giving junior prize money.
Okay.
So even as a 15-year-old making a few hundred rand here and there, the incentive was there right immediately, as opposed to swimming up and down, and maybe not getting too much out of that. And same thing with regards to running. So I would say that triathlon, found me as opposed to me finding triathlon. Yeah.
So why were you so good at triathlon? I mean, to win that many titles is something special. I mean, what is it about Simon Lessing that made him this amazing triathlete?
Well, I think, growing up, as I say, I dabbled in various different sports. I mean, I obviously focused on what you were good at or better at. I think I was probably a better runner than I was swimmer, but I was on a swim team and certainly favored the distance swimming. I think swimming is fundamentally one of the reasons why I was able to sort of transition into multi-sports and endurance sports, just creating that base, that swimming base, non-weight bearing, so you're not dealing with obviously a lot of the injury issues that, for example, young runners are. Controlled environment, so that right off the bat, if you're involved in triathlon and you're looking at being competitive, of course, if you can come out of the water ahead, that's going to be a huge advantage.
That helps.
Yeah.
But things changed over the years. I mean, it used to be, then they started racing in a group, and, you weren't allowed to draft at one point, then the rules changed, and suddenly, if you're a good cyclist, it could make a difference, right? Or the running was more important.
Yeah, and I was kind of in a unique era because, I actually got to compete on both sides of that spectrum. So I was still racing non-drafting races. At the time, the first World Championships that I won was non-drafting. Most of the races in Europe were non-drafting races. And then they introduced, obviously, draft legal races in the short Olympic distance races. And that actually initially was very easy. It was like, oh, wow, this is good. I could just sit behind and, do as little work as possible and focus on one of my strengths, which obviously was the run. So, and then, of course, people honed in on how to start. We were discovering and trying to figure out how to race these races. And it became more and more competitive. And what you'll see is, initially you'd go and win races by, a minute, 2 minutes, maybe even sometimes 3 minutes on a good day. And those times were coming down to literally seconds as we introduced draft legal racing. So it became more of a sort of tactical sport. I didn't necessarily enjoy the format as much. I always felt that, a good triathlete was somebody that could put the combination of swim, bike, run together. And you're able to accept defeat a lot easier when you know that the guy who beat me, certainly was able to put that combination together better on that day. So as we focus more on draft legal racing, that became a little bit of a bitter pill in my mouth, knowing that potentially at times you may be being challenged or getting beaten by people that deep down, if it came down to just swim, bike, run like the old days, you were a better athlete.
So does that mean that triathlon evolved from having to be really good in all three disciplines to you could be a specialist in one and maybe hang in for most of the race and then run away at the end on the run?
I think at the end of the day, the top athletes were still versatile enough to actually be able to race all distances and all categories. It really came down to specializing on the type of format of racing. So obviously, if you're doing non-drafting, there's a little bit more emphasis on cycling. Whereas if you're doing draft legal races, it's potentially swim emphasis, run emphasis for sure.
So some people say, success in sports is like 1% motivation and 99% perspiration. What do you say to that?
I absolutely am a firm believer in hard work. I'm kind of old school in that regard. And ironically, what I see nowadays is a lot of people mass participants who've come into the sport and I say this, obviously it's a huge generalization, but I feel that as we've become more mainstream as a sport, there seems to be less and less respect for the distances that we're racing and the sport itself, in terms of, it is a very physical sport, and it does require lots of hard work, training, blood, sweat, and tears, as the saying goes. And I feel feel that, we've kind of come into this era where anybody can do it.
Sure.
And people have sort of believed in that and taken on that.
Sure.
And, a lot of those same people are very disappointed in their results. And, just trying to explain to athletes, we work with a lot of age group athletes, that it takes a lot of time to develop as an endurance athlete.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just jump in and automatically after a year or two expect to be doing phenomenally well.
Right.
It takes, it took me a decade just to get into a situation where I could run consistently well off the bike.
Right.
So that's, I think it's a lifestyle sport, and the way to look at this is that you're doing the sport for a healthy balance. The real motivation behind it is that, you're able to stay injury-free. Mm-hmm. You're balancing it out between three different sports, three very different sports. So you're essentially avoiding burnout, and you'll see a lot of runners or people that come from single discipline sports coming into triathlon and enjoy the diversity of it.
So part of what we talk about on this show is resilience. What role do you think resilience or being resilient plays in the sport of triathlon? I
think it's, in order to succeed, it's not monetarily driven. Mm-hmm. It never really has been. Right. So you're not going to be making millions and millions and millions of dollars off this. So I think a deep burning passion for it. Mm-hmm. I think, for most of us, it's an escape, mm-hmm. One way or another. Mm-hmm. For a lot of athletes, sport is an escape. Sure. And I think that we all do the sport for very different personal reasons. Mm-hmm. However, I think the one thing in common is a deep passion for what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And I think if you have that passion, you're prepared to extend yourself far further than you are prepared to do so if you are, kind of just playing with it a little bit. So I think for me, it was, obviously goal-driven. I wanted to be the best in the world.
5 times?
5 times. And I think, instead of the titles, the thing that I was really most proud of is that there was an element of consistency to my racing over 2 decades, 20 years of racing. So I wasn't just winning one race and then sort of disappearing for the rest of the season. I was a factor pretty much with every race that I went to, for the most part, through the years. And I think, that's essentially what I was most proud of. So the passion, creates this, this almost an anger, I would say. There's a pride involved, without a doubt. So you hate to lose, and I think in any athlete in any sport, the people that are winning, you'll find something in common. Most of them are not just Mr. Nice Guys. There's something driving them deep down. Personal pride, as I say. Passion, and if you have that, you're prepared to push yourself harder. And for me, I always felt that I was able to stand on the start line ready to race, knowing that I've most probably done a lot more work, or I've worked harder than anyone else on the start line. That may not have been true, but at least it built the confidence in me to go take it out hard. And I think results build confidence. So you have a couple of good results and you start believing in yourself a little bit more and more as the journey goes on.
So you went from doing, Olympic distance then to long distance and then Ironman, and there was a famous battle, right, with you and Mark Allen, right, in a triathlon.
Yeah, so that was still early days. I was still focusing on Olympic distance racing. In actual fact, I was 20 years old, I think I was, when racing Mark, who had won Nice, 9 times. Yeah. And at the time, the race organizers had made this sort of, new guard competing against old guard type thing. So they kind of created this battle. I had no idea what I was doing as a 20-year-old. I think that entire race had maybe 1 banana throughout the entire race over a 6-hour race. And I was taking my Leppen squeezies, if you remember,
yes,
which was
I do.
essentially corn syrup. So that's Leppen squeezies and 1 banana. And I just happened to come out off the bike just ahead of Mark at the end of the bike, started the run together, and I said, well, he knows what he's doing, I'll just follow him.
And this is one of the legends of the sport. You must have been, were you like overwhelmed that you were with the guy?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really expecting it. I didn't really know what to expect. In fact, I had absolutely no sleep the night before because of nerves. And then the morning of, I'd had breakfast, but I remember sitting in the water literally 5-10 minutes before the start, just warming up, throwing up all my breakfast
Oh, wow.
because I couldn't control my nerves. So I literally was racing on an empty stomach. But, again, what the battle was made out to be was not necessarily what I was experiencing internally. For me, this was like, wow, I'm just trying this out. I'll see how it goes. No expectation. And it just turns out that, Mark ended up pulling away with about 3 kilometers to go. 5 kilometers to go, I think it was. And I was just happy to get to the finish line.
Did you feel you were in with a shot of beating him? Was that like...
I really had no idea what to expect. Obviously, this was my first really real, proper long-distance race. It wasn't necessarily what I was focused on. It obviously became this huge battle between the two of us. You have to understand, I think at the time there was probably a lot more money to be made as a professional athlete racing short distance races.
Right.
The other benefit was that, at times I would race both Saturday and Sunday, so 2 days in a row.
Wow.
And
Amazing.
so, the idea behind that is that you're cashing in on both days.
Sure.
And if you think about long distance racing, you're very limited on the number of races that you can do. So, economically, financially, it just made more sense to race short distance. And I quite honestly enjoyed the combative side to it. Long distance racing is more a personal journey. It's a journey against yourself primarily. The challenge is really, how far can you push yourself? Whereas, you really are racing the shorter distance races side by side with your competitors, looking them in the eye and having to react depending on what they're doing as well. So I enjoyed that element of it.
So looking generally, what would you say is the greatest adversity of anything you've done in your life?
I think I think every race offers diversity. I mean, there's disappointments and then there's adversities. I think the thing that really shaped me would be my first year overseas in 1989. I'd left an isolated South Africa. Still, there were political sanctions, sporting sanctions, economic sanctions. Apartheid still was, a major factor. And, I'd managed to essentially get out. And the first year racing in France, I literally had no money. And, I was having to sort of learn French on the go, which obviously was a challenge. And I mean, there were certain circumstances where I'd get on a train to go to a race and find out after a couple of hours that I was going completely in the wrong direction.
Oh, my goodness.
I remember doing one specific race in Annecy where I had literally no money. It was during peak holiday season. I had no money to pay for a hotel. So I had a canvas bike bag that I had traveled with that my mum had made me in South Africa.
Wow.
And I managed to get a campsite and paid my 10 francs and zipped myself up in my canvas bike bag. Wow. I slept not very well that evening, and then sort of folded everything up with my backpack and headed to the race the following morning, raced, and then caught the train back type thing. So a lot of that was soul-searching type scenarios where you're really digging deep and saying, do I really want to be doing this?
Well,
and I think back then, now I have 2 girls the same age as I was back then, and I'm thinking I couldn't imagine them ever doing something like that. I couldn't even imagine myself doing something like that. So it was just kind of hustling, surviving, and with that process, you really realize what's important, what's not important, and how driven are you. Am I prepared to do this? If I am, then I'm prepared to sort of gut it out, and the lows are, you just deal with. Essentially, you grow up very quickly.
Right. So your girls, talking of your girls, I know 1 or 2 of them on scholarships, right? Swimming. What advice do you give them in the world of competition? You're a perfect person to give them great advice. What have you told them when they come
I've
to you?
tried to give them advice before, and I remember a couple of years ago, to give them credit, this might have been, early teens, talking about swimming. They're both swimmers, and I said, I know something about sport, and, this is how I would do it, and giving them, I can't remember what the situation exactly was, but my youngest said, well, you couldn't have been that good, you only finished 9th in the Olympics. So anyway, I knew then there's no point trying to give them advice. They have to learn their own way.
Oh my God.
I think as a parent nowadays, if you have athletes, and I think in any sphere, whether it's academics, etc., if you have the ability to help them, you try and overextend and try and help them.
Right.
So the challenge for both my wife and I is being, they need to learn their way. And they don't want to hear it from us, and it's their journey, and they're going to go through ups and downs, and so being able to I think what's happened is that people feel, well, because you're from an elite athletic background, you're going to be pushing your children, driving them, and I find that through other parents that I know who've also experienced the same athletic experiences that we've had, I feel like we're a little bit more stand backish and let them make their mistakes and learn. We learn that they don't want to hear from us, essentially.
So I like asking everybody on my show these two questions. One is, what's the greatest advice you've ever received?
I wasn't really one for taking advice. And again, like I said, I think there's... and again, I've been asked, who was your mentor? And I don't think I really had a mentor.
Right.
Quite honestly, if I had a mentor, somebody that really motivated me, and if I had the opportunity to have met one individual, that would have been Nelson Mandela.
Okay.
And I think that's a cliche nowadays for people to say that, but that was something that I was obviously consciously aware of in terms of hardships, etc. So in terms of mentors, athletic mentors, I kind of was just figuring it out on my own. Advice, I didn't really seek advice. I wasn't really given much advice.
Okay, that's interesting.
And again, what I've learned now in my role right now is, most people don't want to hear advice. So only give advice when you're asked. And I think, again, this is a journey, and, people are doing it for their own different reasons. They're trying to manage, and certainly with a multi-sport, discipline like triathlon, so time-consuming, and, a lot of the enthusiasts are full-time parents, have full-time jobs, and with all of that, they're also trying to manage, their own dreams of trying to improve or whatever that might be. So everybody has to figure that out and how that works best for them. Some people can train significantly more than others. Some people only have the ability to train one discipline every other day. Sorry, I didn't answer your question.
A different spin on that is, was there any advice that you never received that you wish you had in your life?
I think patience, quite honestly. I think that goes for everybody nowadays coming through. Certainly the younger generation are very impatient.
Okay.
As I say, patience is a virtue, and if you just put your time in, and you are going to, without a doubt, and I think the advice that I could give would be, without a doubt, you are going to face challenges most of the time. And that could be daily, with regards to your training. Not every training workout's going to be the best workout you've ever had. And quite honestly, not every race is going to be the best race you ever had. And I think, as long as you're able to accept that, you take the knocks and you take sort of the negative aspects of what you've experienced and try and break that down, try and learn from that and say, well, what did I, be it a negative or a positive, what did I learn from that? Move on to the next. So holding grudges, again, I learned obviously through the disappointment of the Sydney Olympics was that, I'd kind of lost, I found I wasn't necessarily doing the sport for myself.
Question, Simon, you've obviously had a great passion for sport, athleticism, amazing achievements. What brings you joy in life nowadays? What brings you joy?
Family, I would say, number one, Those odd days when you're not fighting with your children, great.
Those odd days, yeah.
I enjoy being outdoors, and that's kind of one of the primary reasons for us moving to Colorado. So, we here in Boulder have a unique situation where you can literally be riding your bike one day and skiing the next. Not that I'm a big skier. I miss sailing. I miss, obviously, the ocean. So that's, one side of being where we are, which isn't ideal. But just being outdoors. I enjoy hiking a lot. I enjoy interacting with sort of my close-knit of friends. Most people call me grumpy. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily grumpy, but I'll tell you how it is for the most part. But I actually have, when I finished racing full-time, I said, well, I can't just sit on the couch and do nothing.
Sure.
And I'd always been intrigued. When we lived in the UK at our national training centre, we lived on a canal where there was a rowing club. And I'd be out running and I would see these guys sculling, rowing. And I always said, well, one day I'd like to try that. So when I finished racing, I was kind of searching for something different to do, not just swim, bike, run, and sort of got hooked on sculling. So joined the local sculling club here, rowing club here. So that's kind of my new primary activity, and I still swim and bike. Don't run very much, if at all, nowadays, but really find that therapeutic. It reminds me a lot of swimming.
Do you hark back? Do you ever get on the bike or in a swim and think, oh, I wish I could go and race a Masters race, or
Not necessarily. Ironically, I enjoy racing rowing races.
Yeah.
And I'm able to push myself to a level which reminds me a lot of when I was racing as a pro athlete.
Right.
Swimming and biking, not so much. I'm kind of in that groovy comfort level. I still obviously get the endorphin kick, I think, from working out. And, as I said, I didn't want to just sit on the couch and get fat. So I enjoy being outside. I feel good about, working out in moderation. So I usually try and get about an hour or 2 hours of exercise in a day.
Well, let me ask you, is there anything you felt you didn't achieve? I mean, amazing achievements in triathlon. Is there anything in that sport or in that world of triathlon that you wished you had done that you didn't?
Yeah, I mean, I think, people obviously are fairly critical on my long-distance career, but I never really focused on that.
Sure.
I really think that at the time it was, moving towards the Olympics and being part of that Olympic program. That's where, quite honestly, a lot of us, our emphasis was in, trying to go to the Olympics.
Sure.
Of course, for me, the Olympics was a huge disappointment, and I learned a lot out of that. There was an expectation, and I never really quite met up to that expectation. And, again, there was a lot of soul searching after that specific race and finding out what was important to me. And as I said, I kind of realized that, it's a funny track sport is in general, and a track which, you start to do well and everybody's behind you and it's very, very supportive. And then you start to sort of dominate a little bit, and then that just becomes the norm. And you don't necessarily have that same enthusiasm behind your results. So then you're fairly isolated because you're doing it primarily for you, and you potentially have grievances, as people say this or articles say that, and you use that in your favor in terms of motivating you. And then it gets to a point where, the general attitude as well, you're this athlete of a certain caliber, well, of course you won. It's expected. So that takes the enjoyment out of it a little bit, because, you're still doing the work, you're still putting the effort in, And then it gets to the point where after a certain amount of domination or consistency, people want you to get beaten.
Yeah.
And then on that downhill spiral, you're seeing people really celebrate and are overjoyed the fact that you got beaten. But you're still putting in the work, you're still putting in the effort. So it's dealing with that and realizing, well, why am I doing this? Am I doing it for others? Am I doing it for myself? Why am I doing this? And getting back down to it. Now I think I was at that point in the sport where after the Sydney Olympics where I felt, okay, well, why am I doing this? And I realized I'd got to a point where at the end of the day I was kind of doing the sport for everybody else, the people that supported me, my sponsors, and realized that it really had taken all enjoyment out of it. And I had to get back to sort of the grassroots of me, enjoying races, accepting the fact that I wasn't potentially going to maybe win every race. And that was the expectation that I had. I was unbelievably embarrassed if I ever got beaten. Mortified if I got beaten. That motivated me, and I used that as a sort of a carrot on a stick. And that kept me going from one race to the next. I'd be absolutely angered and humiliated if somebody, happened to beat me. And so there was, in terms of motivation, I didn't accept that. I think for a lot of elite athletes, we talk about sportsmanship. And my experience is that, a sport at an elite level doesn't necessarily bring out the best in an individual at all times. It can, the requirements are that it does, you have grudges.
Right.
It can make you mean and nasty. If you miss the nice guy out there, unfortunately, you're susceptible to getting beaten. So that's not necessarily the traits that you want to instill on your family.
Right.
It's a hard one to manage.
Right.
And I see that, even to this day. People who are doing really well and are prepared to take it the next step, they have some inner drive that's getting them there. And it's not necessarily bringing out the best human characteristics.
Well, Simon, thank you. That's a great way to end this one, and I appreciate it. And it's been a pleasure having you on Rezileant.com today.
Okay.
And I hope that with all this crazy COVID-ness, that your boulder coaching is able to keep going, and hopefully we'll get back to normal in the near future. But again, all the best, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks very much.